We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
Well, while the attacks are so fresh on our minds, the concern remains to bring everyone home. The desperation to get out. The threat is real. There's just so much going on right now.
You can feel that, that's for sure. Joining us this morning, Professor of Politics and Global Studies, Ric Epps. Thanks so much for joining us, Professor. We really appreciate it. Should we be concerned about getting Americans out at this point? I mean, we've been told different numbers here, over 1,000, several thousand. We may not even know the exact number, but is there a concern that Americans may be stranded there in Afghanistan?
Well, I would say that there's probably a risk of some of them may be stranded, especially with the vulnerability of the airport. If the Taliban government, along with the troops, cannot secure the airport, because even for fear of rocket fire, then we have a real problem in terms of getting them out. And if the Taliban can't secure that, then we, on their end, then they've got a real problem, both the Taliban government as well as the Americans that are still there. So that would be a huge problem.
Rick, what is the future of Afghanistan with the Taliban trying to take control of the country, and now we hear about ISIS-K? What's going on?
Well, you know, that's interesting because that's a real question mark. Most people believe that the Taliban, when they came in, that it was basically done for now anyway, that the Taliban government, you know, has set up its emirate and they are going to be running the show. However, now we see that there are peripheral groups that are also challenging that rule. I mean, because if you look at the attacks, there were many that they killed, Taliban government folks as well. So it wasn't just targeted at us. And it's, I know this ISIS-K is making a very large statement that they're not going to respect or follow the rule of law in Afghanistan. And what that proposes is that the Taliban, while technically in charge, may not be as stable as we'd like to think it is, particularly in a young government trying to get started. You know, if they're trying to legitimize themselves, it creates a much more serious problem for them and for the region if someone doesn't help stabilize that system. It's dangerous for everyone.
We heard from the president at the top of this segment here, but he is taking heat from prominent Republicans. How do you think this will impact his presidency? I know back home here there's been a lot of finger pointing as to current and past presidents. What are your thoughts on all of that?
You know, it's interesting. Everybody wants, it's like chum in the water, right? Everybody wants to blame everybody else. And so it's not surprising that, you know, Republicans are blamed now, and maybe as Democrats did in other presidencies. This has been a 40-year failing state. And, you know, if people want to point fingers, they can take their time and do that. To me, that's, you know, really doesn't serve any purpose. The truth of the matter is Americans really, if you poll the American public, they wanted to get out of there. However, and I'm not suggesting whether that was the right move or wrong move, because, like I said previously, the danger is what happens next door in Pakistan with Taliban influence there, and Pakistan has nuclear weapons, and it's not as stable of an Islamic state as Iran is. And so the idea of having those weapons get in the wrong hands is a real problem. So the future of the Afghan government, I believe, is going to rely on certainly possibly China and Russia in some weird way, because they already have a foot in the, a partial foot in the region. But also it's going to depend on what our foreign policy is going to help dictate in terms of trying to help even the Taliban secure or protect themselves from ISIS and this threat. And it's a serious threat. Plus, you've got Al Qaeda there too, and so now you've got terrorism that's going to be internal to Afghanistan, and it's going to be potentially external of Afghanistan, and that's a real problem that we have to contend with.
Yeah, you just brought up the weapons question, and that's on a lot of people's minds. Could ISIS-K recruit the Taliban as we train the Afghan forces, and a lot of people from the Afghan forces are now part of the Taliban? These are our weapons, our Black Hawks. I mean, there's a big concern.
Yeah, it's interesting, but, even if the policymakers, as I'm sure they did, looked at worst case scenarios, we've always had this philosophy of leaving the weapons intact and getting out, because logistically it's just too much money to get them all out. The problem with that, just like we saw during the Iraq War, is that when you leave your weapons, then they can use them against you. And so the Iraq War, we lose a few hundred folks during the war, and we lose over 4,000 after the war. Well, war. It's rare that you see more people die after a war than during a war. And this is the same reality in Afghanistan. How do you deal with a situation where fundamentally you've got all these weapons that we left on the ground that if we have to go back in for any reason can now be used against us or any other ally that's in the region or against the Taliban government. That's a real threat.
Yeah, for sure. Professor, we keep hearing this 8/31, August 31st. It's got to be, we got to pull out then. What is the reason for that deadline? Is there any reason that should be extended? What's kind of the backstory to why it's so important to get out on that day, Tuesday?
Well, that was a day that was agreed upon, and basically that the Taliban had said that they wanted us out, and we kind of said, okay, we're going to try and follow so we don't create any more instability in that situation. So that was a date that was agreed to by the government. However, I think that if we were within close proximity of exiting that, and there were security issues that were protected, we probably could have gotten fairly close to that. My concern on several different fronts, but one of them is, even if the worst case scenario was just gamed out for the government and for those who are responsible, then the idea of having that many Americans in the country still, and even to those who were our allies inside the country, the Afghan folks who work with us, I think would have been probably prudent to consider at least a possible exit strategy as things started to devolve very quickly. And so, again, this is part of the difference between politics and policy, right? I mean, the policymakers, the guys and women who sit there and work hard to be able to give good intel information, they give it to, officials, and then the officials have to be able to decide whether they're going to use it or whether they're going to follow the course of action. And a lot of times we see that the course of actions are not followed by what the experts have told them. And so, again, this is the bigger picture here, though, is the reality of us not understanding, or at least not contending with the fact that in these countries, they will just wait us out. So we can have all the best weapons we want and think about all the cool things we want to do. But the fact is, they'll wait 20, 30 years. They don't have a problem with that. And then they will come back just like the Taliban did 20 years later. And here we are, knowing that the American people have no taste for longevity in a dangerous situation. Unlike Germany and South Korea, where troops aren't dying every day. Here, in this situation, we've lost a couple thousand or more just in the last 20 years. So that's much more politically and even amongst American people, that's not something that we're willing to contend with.
Professor Ric Epps, thank you so much for having this conversation with us. It's so complicated and obviously far from over. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.